Did you know there was once a lost state called Franklin? It's a fascinating piece of American history that often gets overlooked. Let's take a journey back to the 1780s, right after the American Revolution, when a group of ambitious settlers tried to create their own state. Picture this. The newly formed United States is still figuring out its boundaries. In what is now eastern Tennessee, a group of pioneers decided they wanted to forge their own path. They weren't content with being part of North Carolina, so they set out to create something new. These settlers had big dreams. They wanted Franklin to become the 14th state of the United States. Can you imagine how different our map might look today if they had succeeded? But here's the thing. Franklin never quite made it to official statehood. Why didn't Franklin become a state, you might ask? Well, it's a bit of a complicated story. The U.S. government never officially recognized Franklin as a state. It's like when you're playing a game, and someone says they're joining, but the referee doesn't acknowledge them. That's kind of what happened to Franklin. The people of Franklin faced some pretty big challenges. There were political disagreements both within the region and with the government of North Carolina. It's like when you're trying to organize a big event, but everyone has different ideas about how it should be done. That's the kind of situation the Franklin settlers found themselves in. Another problem was lack of support. Imagine trying to start a new club at school, but not enough people sign up to make it official. That's similar to what happened with Franklin. They just couldn't gather enough backing to make their state a reality. Despite all their efforts, Franklin's time as a would-be state was short-lived by the late 1780s. The dream of Franklin had faded. The area that had hoped to become Franklin eventually became part of Tennessee when it joined the Union in 1796. It's a bit like when you have a great idea for a project, but it ends up becoming part of something else instead. But here's an interesting fact. Franklin is sometimes called a lost or forgotten state. It's not because it disappeared into thin air or anything mysterious like that. It's because for a brief moment in history, it existed as its own entity, even though it never became official. It's like a footnote in American history that not many people know about. The story of Franklin gives us a glimpse into the early days of the United States. It shows us how challenging it was to form new states back then. Today, we're used to seeing 50 stars on our flag, but in the 1780s, the country was still figuring out what it would look like. Think about it. The American Revolution had just ended, the country was brand new, and everyone was trying to figure out how things should work. It was a time of great change and uncertainty. The Franklin story is just one example of how people were trying to shape the future of the nation. In a way, Franklin's story is like a window into the past. It shows us how different groups had different ideas about how the country should be organized. Some wanted more states, some wanted fewer, some regions wanted independence, while others preferred to stay part of existing states. What's really interesting is how the Franklin story highlights the complexity of early American politics. It wasn't just about big decisions made in Philadelphia or New York. There were all these local movements and ideas bubbling up across the new nation. Franklin was one of those ideas that almost made it big. But even though Franklin didn't become a state, its legacy lives on. It's a reminder of the spirit of independence and self-determination that was so strong in early America. The settlers who tried to create Franklin were pioneers in more ways than one. They were exploring new territories and new ideas about governance. Today, when we look at a map of Tennessee, we don't see any borders marking out the state of Franklin, but if you know where to look, you can still find traces of this almost state. There are historical markers and local legends that keep the memory of Franklin alive. It's fascinating to think about how close Franklin came to changing the course of American history. If it had succeeded, how might that have affected other regions? Would we have seen more attempts at creating new states? It's one of those what-if questions that historians love to ponder. The Franklin story also teaches us about the importance of compromise and cooperation in building a nation. The United States didn't just appear fully formed. It was the result of many negotiations, debates, and sometimes failed experiments like Franklin. In the end, the area that wanted to be Franklin found its place as part of Tennessee, and Tennessee itself became an important part of the growing United States. It's a reminder that even when things don't work out exactly as planned, they can still contribute to something greater. So next time you're looking at a map of the United States, remember the story of Franklin. It's a little piece of history that reminds us how complex and fascinating the formation of our country really was. Who knows? Maybe there are other lost states out there, just waiting for their stories to be rediscovered. The tale of Franklin is more than just a quirky historical footnote. It's a story about ambition, politics, and the challenges of nation building. It shows us that the United States we know today didn't just appear overnight. It was shaped by countless decisions, both big and small, made by people all across the growing nation. As we look back on the story of Franklin, we can appreciate the courage and determination of those early settlers. Even though their dream of statehood didn't come true, they played a part in shaping the country we live in today, and that's something worth remembering. So, the next time you're driving through eastern Tennessee, take a moment to imagine what it might have been like if Franklin had succeeded. You might be crossing state lines instead of just passing through. It is a little reminder that history is full of what-ifs and almost worse, and that's what makes it so fascinating to explore.